Howdy folks, this is Hal, your friendly geology instructor. I'm on the Paria River in the Paria River Canyon in the Utah-Arizona boundary, border, whatever. Anyways, here's the Paria River, very dirty. And what's cool here is we've got this like stepping stone stratigraphy. There's a layer, there's a layer, there's a layer. And as I go closer to the bank, I see that this is happening on even more layers. There's another layer, there's another layer. As I approach those trees, there's yet another layer. What the heck is going on here? It's almost like a staircase of sandy layers. So let's go up to that top one and figure this out. So one thing we should know, we're on a point bar, which is the inside of a bend in the river. And that's where the velocity of the water is the slowest, even during a flood. And that's where there's gonna be the most deposition. So here's what I want you to imagine. Someday in the past, let's say 50 years ago, huge epic flood comes tearing down the Paria River and fills it right to this level here. Same level as that surface where that little cottonwood's growing. And it completely blankets this whole area with sediment that deep. Okay, that's the flood. The important thing to note during the flood, it's very erosive. It's scouring the surface. It's eroding. But then as the flood is ending, the water slows down and starts depositing. And that's what this top layer is. This is all flood deposition. And you can actually see the erosion surface right here. So key things to note, it's irregular. It's not perfectly flat. There's all this debris on it. So like little bits of sediment. This is the former surface. And then everything up above it got deposited on top. So your clues that we're looking at an erosion surface is that it's irregular. Anything that's not a flat surface when we're looking at these stacks of sediment is probably an eroded surface. Okay, so the flood comes in, erodes down to here, who knows how high it had been before, and then dumps this like meter of sediment. Pretty cool. Dumps it all the way across the river. But then the river comes back. Well, it never went away. The river starts eroding afterwards and slowly starts cutting down. Maybe it cuts down to this surface that I'm standing on, and then it cuts down to the next and the next and the next, and it just keeps cutting down. But that's not the end of the story because it keeps flooding as well. So maybe the next flood jumps up, and the next flood dumps this layer of sediment. So it's not as high as that previous one. It left that one high and dry, but it drops off this layer of sediment. Then as the flood wanes, normal river processes resume and we start eroding again and again, and we hop down some more. And now maybe our next flood comes to here. And you're getting the point here. Every one of these floods has been smaller than the previous one. So we've got maybe like 4 or 5 floods from the top, another, and now we're at river level. So the cool thing here is what this tells us is since that first one was deposited, every flood since then has been smaller. And actually, if I had some laboratory analysis money, we could do some carbon-14 dating on this stick right here that is stuck in that first flood layer. This stick came down with that flood. It's now been eroded out, but if we really cared about knowing how old these floods were, we'd take a chunk from the inside of it, we'd get a carbon-14 date, and it would tell us like 1950, 1920, I don't know. And that would tell us when this first big flood was. And then we could put together the recent flood history of this place. Pretty cool, huh? Alrighty, that's what I got for you folks. Oh wait, one last thing. This is becoming a river terrace. So let's say that this last big flood is the last flood that reaches that area. Well, then instead of that being the floodplain, it becomes abandoned. The river permanently stays lower down. And an abandoned floodplain we call a terrace. And they really stick out for being completely flat. You can tell the forest growing on here is growing on a flat surface. And stable. You start getting trees that can't tolerate flooding. You probably can't see, but there's a whole bunch of junipers growing there that could never deal with flooding. So I think this is in the process of becoming a terrace. All right, terraces and floodplains and all sorts of cool stuff. Yeehaw.